Like, did you ever feel like there was someone who was like, this is how you create culture, this is how you lead, or like,
I get it because
they care about you. They care about your whole body.
Yeah,
they care about your body.
And,
like, creates a sense of belonging for everyone that's in that environment. Like, that's kind of my vision and why I'm making that transition to that space.
What's up, guys? Welcome to the Linecheck podcast. It's me, Brennan Villarreal. Today I'm in the studio with Ian Troost. We met on the internet.
Yeah.
It's called Instagram.
A quick little slid into your DMs.
Yeah, slid into my DMs. Just really enjoyed what we were doing on the podcast and talking about restaurants and culture and all that. And you were talking to me about, you know, you've been in sports for majority of your life playing football.
Yep.
And I also played a lot of sports growing up. So we just wanted to connect the dots between working in restaurants and being like a player in a team with coaches.
Yeah, I think because I just finished that. I just graduated with my Master's of Ed at UCLA, but it was a program called Transformative Coaching and Leadership, and I wanted to write my my thesis on like the comparison between like head chefs and head coaches of sports teams, because like you kind of see, you know, the Bears a great example. It highlights like a couple of like whether they're, you know, fake situations in that case or like burnt or whatever.
Yeah.
Like you can have like a high level restaurant that does really well and it's such a toxic workplace. But the same is for sports. Like you can have a championship winning team.
Toxic, super toxic,
you know, to not throw any recent teams under the bus, but like we'll just go back to Bobby Knight and Indiana basketball. But like, I like want to me, because I grew up in a small town in Portsmouth, New Hampshire, and restaurant culture is like insane there. We have like 30,000 restaurant seats, I think, to 20,000 people. So it's a very tourism driven, right on the water. And so I grew up working in restaurants and kind of had a couple of those experiences, some positive, some negative. And so it's always just kind of held like this. But yeah, that's kind of why I slid into your DMs, because I was like, any interest in talking about that?
Yeah.
And unfortunately,
what are your favorite sports teams? Like, what are your teams?
Well, I'm of course a Boston guy, so I'm an hour north of Boston, so through and through. New England.
Yeah,
I know it's
you
tough.
guys won the championship, so I can't really say anything. And you guys have 19 now, so
we have that. We have one more than you all. So, Boston guy. But for soccer, I grew up playing soccer as well and coached college soccer. So, Bayern Munich was like a big team for me. But I love. I've been getting into like NWSL, Kansas City Current. They're the first women's professional team in the United States to have their own stadium. Wow. So I've been following them. So that's been really, really cool.
There's actually a all women's sports bar that's going to be opening up in Long Beach soon.
No way.
Yeah. So they're just going to be playing female sports.
That's awesome. I saw one of those exist. I can't remember the name of it. I wish I did. In Minnesota. Mm-hmm. And so that's awesome that it's opening up.
Perfect timing with Caitlin Clark, you know, blowing up right now. What a better time to like have showcase women's sports.
It's been so cool. And like in that program too, I had a lot of teammates who were, or teammates. I had a lot of classmates. I'm retired. I had a lot of classmates who were in UCLA athletics and or coaches. And one of them, my friend Bubba, she plays for Athletes Unlimited. It's like this professional softball league that does like this rotating every week is a new team, so all the players, like it's a pool of 40 or so players or maybe more. That was at least the first round. That might be more when they're in Chicago right now, but and then they get drafted week by week by a team captain, and it's like the highest performing player. But it's cool like that. I've been following that, and so like I've been really getting into these like non-traditional. Yeah, they should be more traditional, right? But like these non-traditional, up and coming sports scenes, and it reminds me a lot of like you've had on Ben Quinn and like Kristen Rodriguez, and to name a few that have like stick out in my mind of your episodes of like these different structures of how like whether it's leadership structures or pay structures, or Ben Quinn talked about like giving more ownership or whatever. So I would love to hear more about what's happening in the restaurant world, because to me that's what I feel like that's happening in the sports world, but it's also slow to change. Like it's hard to pick up traction.
Yeah, like Deion Sanders as that new type of coach that's like making a surgence in the sports scene. Just like that old school mentality of not being like just being like the top guy, like shut the fuck up and do your job.
Yeah.
And now Deion Sanders like, I'm here for you, man. Whatever you need, blah blah. I got your back. You got my back. We're gonna do this together.
Yeah.
That's like how I kind of see it in the restaurant industry as well right now. It's like feeling equal.
Yeah.
To a coach or a chef, as a line cook or a player to head coach.
Nice.
That's how I kind of see that right now. But yeah, there's a lot of there's just like, it depends on a restaurant, because there's different systems in place, and not everyone is the same. Like you can have like a 10-seated counter service restaurant, and depending on how busy it is, you can have like 2 people working it, and they get all the tips, or maybe your line cook can be like a / line cook server, depending on what the food program is. Well, like it could be small plates like tapas, or it could be like a burger place where you need probably like more stuff because it's you probably turn and burn,
right.
But it's interesting to see. It just depends on the mold of who is running the place, and I think it's cool when different places decide to base their model off of making it easier, but also paying their staff like a good wage.
Yeah. That's another connection between sports and restaurants is coaches. We don't really make that much. It's kind of why I'm headed out of the coaching world.
Yeah, it's how much does like an assistant coach make in NFL, or we say college? I'm gonna say college.
Yeah, so I coached college soccer for 2 years, but I didn't get paid.
Damn.
I mean, it's kind of,
like,
I guess,
how do you make it? What do you do?
I guess that would be the equivalent of staging, but for much longer.
And you just like do it for a really long time. I mean, I was watching the new Hard Knocks off season on HBO, and it's with the New York Giants, and the coach, the general manager that is of New York Giants now, he was just like a scouting guy for the NFL for like since 2001 or 2000. I'm like, damn, this guy has been just like doing the dirty work for a long ass time. And he's like, I just eat peanut butter and jelly sandwiches and drive to different places to meet new players. I'm like,
it's
and it's 2024, but he is the GM of the New York Giants. But what a long road.
It definitely,
you have to pay your dues first before you get anywhere.
Yeah, I'd say that it's similar in like the sport industry, whether it's college athletics or pros, but like to get to pros is kind of, you go the college. I mean, I don't know. I can't speak too much to the pro route, like becoming a professional coach. It's just like, but it's very much paying your dues. And, I played college soccer and then transferred and played college football. And from that perspective, I saw like, you're a player and then you become a graduate assistant, right? And as a graduate assistant, you basically are just doing Lord knows what, like everything under the sun that is needed. You're there pretty similar hours as coaches, which is very early to very late. And the idea is that you work your way up, then you get, maybe a analyst position, then you get like from analyst you become oversee a certain area. So the football route is kind of crazy, but for soccer, it would have been, had I stayed on that track, and then I got this degree, I could probably go and get like a second assistant position, but it's very similar, I would say, to, Ben mentioned the Escoffier, is that right? Like that kind of like framework of leadership. And so it's like, head coach, and you get to a first assistant, second assistant, volunteer assistant. So I didn't have a lot of say in like the tactics or anything. I had none. I would try and whisper in the coach's ear, be like, put this guy here, and barely worked.
Yeah.
And but other than that, then the next step I would have been like a second assistant somewhere, maybe a first assistant. Or in college, it's interesting because sometimes if you're a second assistant at like a D1 level, then you might drop down and like jump to, I guess it could be similar to a restaurant. Like you work at a big restaurant as like a sous chef. You might be able to go be a head chef at a country club or something, and so you kind of trade off, right? It's very similar, right? You lose resources maybe, or maybe you lose a little creativity. So yeah, it's definitely interesting.
It seems like it would be easier to be a player than to be an assistant coach or head coach
at a professional
level? Or just a coach in general.
Coaches, it
seems like they just grind all the time and like constantly just thinking about the game and their players and everything. Like their brain never turns off, and always like I just see it from Hard Knocks. They're in the office all the time.
For some coaches, it's like what they're meant to do. So it's like they're absolute junkies for the game. And I kind of had that realization, and that's kind of why I wanted to come get my degree. But then also like I would love to. It's funny, I say I like want to transition into like food. Adjacent industry or food industry. I'm moving to.
Why did you decide to switch in that? Maybe you can talk a little bit about what you're gonna venture into in a couple of days.
Yeah, so I love food. Like I said, I grew up in Portsmouth, New Hampshire, and it just worked in like a couple great restaurants, some not so great, but but learned a lot. Like you learn to just be around people, you learn to interact with people, you learn to be a part of a team, and that like aided me as a student athlete a lot, and as a coach, like that kind of mentality. And it's like, well, if someone doesn't show up, if the dishwasher doesn't show up, someone's just got to do it. Like it's got to get done. So that kind of became like my mentality as a player. Like, well, if someone gets injured, like I'll go anywhere, even if I don't want to play there. Or as a coach, it's like, I don't really want to pick up the cones, or I don't really want to like do this. And some coaches will prescribe by that mentality of like, it's the worst player on the team's job, or it's the freshman's job. Like I always tried to be the volunteer assistant, because I wanted to show the players, I was like, you guys can do this too, like I'll do it. I'll still do it. But I like loved, I don't know, I've always been drawn to food. I love cooking. My buddy Curran, he's a writer, and he does these little comedy shows in his backyard up in LA and Culver City. And so I just started, he gets like some decent guys like Chad Kroger, Benedict Polizzi, and I just was like, hey man, like could I cater, like could I whip up some food for that? And so I ended up serving like just homemade pork tacos with 3 different homemade salsas for like 60 people. And it was like a rush. Like I loved it. Because it was like just so fun to like, I was like, wow, you're like nourishing people. But then also it was complimentary to his event, like his program. And so it created this sense, and he had a really great job curating the backyard. And I imagine it's similar to like when you're doing your pop-up events with Got Your Back, right? Where every little detail is kind of taken care of. And so the person just has to show up, and, they get the comedy, they get the entertainment, they get the food, maybe they get a drink. And then the environment kind of facilitates like conversation, which then facilitates like community building. And so coming from a small town, I want to get back into that. And athletics provides that, like sports provides room for community, but I'm finding like I just feel it's very much more exclusionary than it is inclusive at this point in time.
Yeah, I can totally see that. Unless you're a run club.
Yes. Unless you're a run club. Unless you're a run club.
Run clubs are a thing now.
Oh, Venice Run Club.
I think it's funny. I just started running last year, around this time last year, and I've done 2 marathons in a year.
Wow.
But I didn't really know about run clubs until like
Did you join one?
I like do all these different ones. Just whatever fits into my schedule. Like at Rose Park Run Club, they're real good friends, and most of them work in the industry, so they like have the run club later because, you know, they're not 6 a.m.ers after getting off a shift at like midnight.
Right.
And then I have like a couple other friends that have run clubs as well. And yeah, but it's cool. But they're like, some of them have like 100 people like going to them, and some have like 20 or 15.
Yeah.
I enjoy them sometimes, but I really just love being by myself. I like running by myself. But yeah, run clubs those are like it's a new thing. They said it's like a dating
that's what I've heard. Like I haven't been to one, but I heard Venice Run Club, when you show up, I think that everyone introduces themselves, and they introduce themselves as either single. I think it's voluntary. Like you don't have to do that, but like, which is good. It would be kind of not great if you had to do that. But yeah, it's turning into this whole thing. Now I'm seeing like Instagram skits about it. And,
yeah, they're hilarious.
Yeah,
it's so funny.
But other than run clubs, athletics to me just feels, and it's really interesting because it's kind of coming on the heels of Caitlin Clark and Angel Reese, and like, you know, the WNBA has been so great for so long with like players like Maya Moore and
Lisa Leslie,
Candace
Parker,
and like, but now it's really cool. That whole conversation is a whole different conversation, but like it's, you know, it's really interesting because the NWSL is growing, WNBA is growing. You know, I just mentioned my friends, Athletes Unlimited softball, is like this new thing that's growing. That's on ESPN. Like,
wow.
And it's brand new, and it's like this new concept, and so that's growing. But simultaneously, it's also highlighting the cracks and how exclusionary sports are, kind of, and like, you know, the Caitlin Clark conversation is a good example of that, because it's like, well, you know, the WNBA was built on the backs of Black women and how hard they worked, and like, and so I can see where that conversation exists and is frustrating, and then like, you know, it's not necessarily facilitated properly, right? Because there's been all these great journalists who have covered the WNBA for so long, and then you don't necessarily have then you have journalists who have been covering men's sports for so long coming in, and because now it's the popular thing with Caitlin Clark, and they're not covering it or giving it like necessarily, they're not facilitating that coverage properly, I would say. So it's still leading, like it's still creating environments that maybe aren't as inclusive as they were built up to be. So in a weird way, I don't know, this is all my opinion as well.
I think I get what you're saying, because I just like watch a little bit of whatever is happening in WNBA or NBA. I follow a lot of sports, but mostly just basketball and football. But I saw this one journalist, it was a post-game conference, and he asked Caitlin Clark something, and it was like super cringy, and then he got banned. I totally forgot what happened, but maybe you remember.
He was
just like
Indiana.
He said maybe you should like smile more or something like that.
The Indy star. Yeah, I don't remember his name. Probably for the best. He was like, if you do that every game or something, we'll get along just fine.
She did like the heart to her family.
Yeah, and he said, if you do that to me every game, we'll get along just fine. So terrible.
Yeah, very cringy, very like creepy,
so out of touch. So just like,
and I think that's like a good example of what you're saying, like the wrong journalists are wanting to talk about the wrong things,
right,
that have nothing to do with like.
Yeah, and like it's such a missed opportunity for him to ask Caitlin other questions about how she sees the growth of the game, or how does she make environments inclusive? What's her transition been like to the you know? So it's just, I guess my point being, like, I see that there's so many similarities. That's where I see a lot of similarities in the restaurant and sports space. Is like the restaurant space can still be, you know, it's been built by like white men. It's, you know, still a toxic environment. Like, it's funny, in Ben's episode, he talked about Bourdain's book. Why can't I remember? It's like, I love that book. What's it called?
Oh, Kitchen Confidential.
Confidential. Oh my God. I'm like, I can't pull it. And it's like reevaluating. So it's like, yeah, when I read that book 10 years ago, I was like, yeah, like sweet.
Yeah, awesome. Everyone was like, "This is awesome."
And
It's
then
like, "Fuck yeah, I work in a fucking kitchen."
yeah, and like I mean, I didn't read it from that perspective, but I read it as like someone who had like expoed, and I was like, yeah, I worked in a kitchen,
Yeah,
you
yeah,
know,
yeah.
like
It's
and
call ourselves kitchen pirates.
exactly. And but then you look at some of the stuff that was said, and it's like, yeah, it worked for his kitchens, and maybe that's, but like, and maybe it was seemed inclusive, but like, was it? Did everyone actually feel like they belonged? I don't know. That's a question I would ask after going through this program at UCLA. I'm like, okay, even if it was inclusive, like those people, you know, they all worked there, like they were included,
Mhm.
but did all of them necessarily feel like they belonged? And so that's where I'm at with like athletics. And so I imagine that still exists in the restaurant space and in like in the food space, but I think that there's more room. It's easier, I feel like, in the restaurant space. Maybe not easier is not maybe not the right word, but like there are more people realizing that because there are more women who are owners and chef owners and restaurateurs and like people of color and maybe gender expansive individuals who are creating these spaces and creating these restaurants versus in the sports space. It's like, oh, 95% of Division One men's teams are coached by men. 40% of Division One women's teams, or 60% of Division One women's teams are also coached by men. 80% of those on each side are white. So it's like, how is that not, you know what I mean? That's so many white men coaching sports. And so it's like, versus, you know, there was I should remember her name, but she was the
Spurs assistant.
Oh yeah, Becky Hammond.
Yeah.
She's amazing. And and University of Chicago, and I should remember her name. And apologies if she ever sees this that I don't. But she was the first. She won the first national championship as a woman's head coach for University of Chicago, and they're D3. But now she got a job coaching University of Denver. But like that should happen more. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like it should not matter whether, you know, just like it doesn't matter if it's who the head chef is. Like, you know what I mean? Like Erin French, she's one of my favorite chefs in Maine, Lost Kitchen, and or like Alice Waters is a great example. You know what I mean? Like Chez Panisse and like so. But in sports, it's still so patriarchal, so patriarchal, and just like.
And do you think that's also like the people at the top as well, like the owners or just like above the coaches? Because in college, it seems like it's very like old school, traditional, like in the way they run things. You know, a lot of traditions that haven't changed.
Yeah, I would say pro is starting to take a turn. I think, and this may sound crazy, like a little bit quicker than college. Some people might call me out for that.
No, I think so too.
You know, just with teams like Julie Ehrman and Angel City, like setting a tone, and like Brittany Mahomes and Kansas City Current. But I think on the college side, like in Division One, if you look at Division One Power Four, so schools that are in the ACC, SEC, not Pac-12 anymore, rest in peace, Big Ten and Big 12, I think it's like 50 to 55 athletic directors, and only, I think, less than 10 are women. Like I think like 7 are women. And just right there, that alone is like, well, then women aren't making the hiring decisions. Like women aren't in these spaces from the top down. You know, maybe they're an assistant athletic director or an like deputy athletic director or something, but they're not in those positions. So yeah, I think it's slower to move on that side. I can't remember the original question exactly, but
yeah, no, I can totally get that. And yeah, I just think it's like they just keep the old traditions and they just never change it. My hat back on.
Yeah, it's hard. I was gonna ask, like, so another thing that this program brought kind of like that I didn't think about until the time came. Like I became a coach because I thought that I wanted to like pursue it, and a little bit ego. Like I thought I would maybe win a national championship someday as like a D2 soccer coach or something. But like, you know what they say, when your athletic career sucks, you become a coach or something like that.
I thought about that still.
Yeah.
I still think it's like maybe I should just become a coach. I'm like, I think my time has passed already, but
yeah. Well, we always need coaches at the youth level, you know? But it's like, we learned, like something we talked about was there's no standardization for like there's, and this is kind of what I wanted to talk to you about, is like, for a coach and for chefs, and correct me if I'm wrong, but this is how I view it. Like for a coach and for chefs, there's ways to do things, right? There are techniques, there are skills that we can teach others, right? Like you can teach someone how to, you know, different knife skills. You can teach someone how to shoot like with your laces if you're talking about soccer. Or you can teach someone how to, you know, properly get position leverage like on a route or something. And those things are tangible skills that you can teach. And so coaches, like that's kind of how coaches come up. It's like, who's the best at teaching those things? And then also a little bit of like philosophy, right? And so, but then after that, I never as a coach got leadership training, like how to create a culture in a team. I never learned that, you know, and I based it for a long time off of what I saw growing up as a player. And so like, you know, at whatever football team I played on in college, like I guess Pitt, like I didn't love the culture, you know, at certain points it wasn't the most positive. And so, you know, there were other times where it was, so I'm not going to say like whatever, but, you know, you think about like, oh, you know, well, we had success here. So then I impart that as a coach, right? Or I impart this philosophy from a coach or this philosophy from a coach. But at no point did anyone ever tell me to like use my internal compass and like integrate my values to my leadership philosophy. They said, you know, take what you liked from this coach, from this coach, from this coach. And so I'm curious if it's the same with chefs, because I feel like, did you ever feel like there was someone who was like, this is how you create culture, this is how you lead, or like, I don't know if you did culinary school or not.
Yeah, I went to culinary school. Like, they definitely didn't teach you that in culinary school, but I get it because my first, you know, I played football in high school. And so, you know, you always had the coaches you liked, and then you had the coaches that you really didn't like on the same team. I loved like strength coaches. For some reason, the strength coach is the coolest coach.
It's because they care about you. They care about your whole body.
Yeah,
they care about your body. It's like,
and all the other coaches were just like dicks and mean to you.
Yeah,
and, you know, yell at you all the time. And you know, after we had our first conversation on the phone, you know, I looked back at that, and then going into my first, you know, kitchen job, and is like very similar. Like my chef is basically my asshole head coach, fucking yelling at me, and you know, not really like teaching me, just giving me tips or being condescending at the same time, or just like not really teaching me. And you know, it's not a reflection of me; it's a reflection of themselves, and just being like, you know, not a very good chef, or being incompetent, or also being, you know, drinking too much but the day before. But yeah, and I just like, I think that's why I liked it, because I love playing football, and then I also love working in kitchens, and so those two things they melted very easily for myself.
Right.
And I just and I think moving forward after that, working in different kitchens and seeing different chefs, just like different coaches, I realized that that how you create the culture is, you know, after working so many places. And also, you know, there's different restaurants, and then you have like an owner or a chef owner, and depending on who it is, they create that culture for their staff. And it's just the way they just teach you. And that's honestly how that boils down to, is how they teach you and how they're patient. If you have a chef that's not patient with you, then they don't give a fuck about you.
So like, what do you see? I guess because that's kind of how I want to get into, like, to me, there's this great organization called like the Center for Healing and Justice Through Sport, and they coach coaches how to coach, right? Like I'm not going to teach a coach how to teach a technique. They know the technique, but I'm going to teach them how to like respond to a player who's maybe having a tough day, or like, you know, maybe a player that's picking on another player. So like, I was like, I wonder, and maybe it sounds like maybe there's not, or like maybe culinary school doesn't teach this. Like,
yeah, they don't teach that.
And this is like where I get self-conscious of being on a restaurant podcast of like, as a non-chef, of like but like creating an environment where you can give chefs or restaurateurs or like GMs the tools and the resources to understand everything else outside of how a restaurant operates. And obviously there are going to be days where a restaurant just piles it on.
Yeah.
And that leads to a day where it's like people kind of get a little up in arms, or a little, you know, frustrated or defensive. Just like, you know, any sports match or whatever where you get blown out, but you know, ultimately, like, I would love to find a way to give like people, like chefs or restaurateurs or GMs or people in the restaurant industry, like the tools to focus on community building, the tools to focus on like leadership development, so that they can create an environment that's not just inclusive, but like creates a sense of belonging for everyone that's in that environment. Like, that's kind of my vision and why I'm making that transition to that space. Like, sports are also just, I'm kind of just burnt out on them.
Yeah.
I want to be a fan again. Like, I just want to not care.
I know what you mean.
You know what I mean? Like,
yeah, I mean, I love sports, and it took me 10 years to like I stopped watching sports because I just did it so much, and I really hated football. That's why I stopped playing, because it wasn't fun for me anymore. And I just started watching sports again like 3 years ago. And I love it now. And I think you just have to step away for a little bit to get back into it. And I think that'll happen. And same thing, like, I don't feel like watching The Bear right now because, you know, I've been doing this shit for a while, and I'm like, I don't want to watch this show. But anyways, it was really good to have you on the podcast today.
Yeah, man. Well, I appreciate it.
You enjoyed it. It was really fun to talk to you.
I love it.
We should definitely talk soon. Catch up and see how your travels are in Brooklyn.
Absolutely. Yeah. Leave 2 days. Tomorrow's my last day in LA. Awesome. And then I'll pack up my 2008 Subaru and drive across the country, and
hell yeah,
find myself in Greenpoint, and hopefully some restaurant adjacent. I'll give a shout out in case but Hot Bread Kitchen is where I applied.
Okay.
And it's kind of like it's a front of house training instructor. So like they give the curriculum, but then you're teaching, their members are primarily like women of color, and migrant women, and like gender expansive individuals. And so it's like hopefully giving them the tools to then go and work in these front of house spaces in all these restaurants in New York. So that's the position I applied for.
Awesome.
So hopefully a stepping stone into what we talked about today. You know,
well, I'm excited for you.
Thank you, man.
Yeah.
I appreciate it. I love watching and learning from you guys too. And like all the guests you've had on so far have just been awesome. Like,
thank you.
It's super, it was really cool to learn. And I started listening to your podcast like at the end of my grad program, and like thinking about these different leadership philosophies, and like kind of weaving those into like, I had to write a paper on like leadership philosophy, and like I was weaving a little bit. So no, you guys, you're all crushing it. So.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Yeah.
Thanks for reaching out too. And if anyone wants to reach out to us to have a chat, DM us, email us. Don't call me, just kidding. But that's all time we have for today. We'll see you guys next time. Peace.
Sweet, man. Thank you.